The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spin-Off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, like celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spin-Off with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
One of the favourite themes of this podcast is talking to cool companies adding value to the primary sector. With agri-exports such a huge part of our economy, and in a sector with its share of challenges where tech and innovation can help, it's one of the most important things we can get right and improve. There's heaps happening in the space, so much that just the other week, 65 delegates from here headed off to the top agritech conference in Asia Pacific. The conference is called Evoke AG, and Callaghan Innovation brought together a mission on a mission to increase the good stuff and export great products and ideas. One of those companies was Sparrows, whose purpose is to cut food waste by using smart sensors and data to keep track of where everything is and where it's meant to be, at what temperature and for how long. It's leading to less product being written off, a huge problem in the food industry. Sparrows CEO and founder Andrea Watson was at Evoke AG and joins us now, along with Simon Yarrow, who leads Callaghan Innovation's agritech team and put together the contingent. Kia ora, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hey, so first up, Simon, what is Evoke AG and why is it so important to turn up?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Simon, Evoke AG is the largest agricultural technology conference in Australasia, and New Zealand's considered a global leader in the space. Startup Genome recently came out and put us in the top 10 in terms of ag and food tech startup ecosystem. So it's really important that we're there. We're seen as a leader. Callaghan's job is to help entrepreneurial companies like Sparrows, help them globalise. So, yeah, it was really important that we helped facilitate and put together a delegation to go to Evoke Ag.
It's really interesting looking at kind of the idea behind the mission, in that we've got these great companies, but we've got such a small market, even though we're kind of like quite a big player in terms of primary exports. It's just not that many actual businesses and companies, and just needing that leg up to get to those bigger industries in order to sell to more than just the New Zealand market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, agri-technologies is in the past been seen as a tool for New Zealand's agricultural industry. But also at the same time, we have developed a few really good global companies, Gallagher, Waikato Milking, LIC, for example. And what we're trying to do is develop that next generation, that pipeline of companies. So, to give you a sense of scale, Simon, agricultural exports are around sort of 45 billion. Agritech exports are 1.5 billion. So, yeah, there's a huge opportunity there for New Zealand from a global perspective.
And who are these 65 odd companies? Like, what kind of, are they companies people have heard of, or are they new kind of, cool things like we've talked to people on this podcast who are doing things like using satellite imagery to work out how hot your fields are to make sure you're using the right amount of water and the like, which may not be household names, but are just such cool ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we actually had a real mix. So, we had Zespri there, who probably, hopefully everyone knows, one of New Zealand's most successful agricultural companies. But yeah, all the way down to one-person startups, doing really, really cool technology across, environmental technology, digital, satellite is a good example that you mentioned. So yeah, we had a really good cross-section, and that's the whole point. We want to put the researchers, the investors, the companies, the tech entrepreneurs all together, and that's where the magic happens, because you need all those people to be working together to be successful.
Sounds like quite a cool role to talk to a whole lot of interesting companies doing some cool stuff and then head off to Perth. What's your background? Have you been... You've done a bit on both sides of the in the entrepreneurship side and in the helping people make stuff happen side.
Yeah. So my background's, like you say, so I'm in a bit of a mix. So I've worked for the sort of big corporates or co-ops like Fonterra and LIC, but also know the challenges of running a startup. So I looked after a venture capital funded startup in the animal health and food health space. And so, I have a lot of empathy for our clients and the challenges they're going through, and also the huge rewards that are there if they're successful. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you've done a bit through the agritech space, but Andrea, your background wasn't quite as in that sector also. Tell us about what you were up to before your idea that led to the startup.
So I was in finance. I was an accountant, and I was working at Air New Zealand before I started Sparrows. So initially I did a hackathon with Coca-Cola, and basically it was this amazing opportunity for them to give us all of their supply chain data. And during that time I met one of their truck drivers, John, and John owned 7 trucks, and he was using them between 5 a.m. and 3 p.m. And as an accountant, I was like, wow, there's so much opportunity for him to fill his trucks and use them at night and weekends. And basically, through the lean startup approach, you validate the idea, but there was something that wasn't quite working. So I ran off to London and did that for 4 years. But when I came back, it was still nagging at me. So I contacted Coke and said, what are you doing? And basically they said that they were going to do an accelerator program in Sydney, and would I apply? So I applied with that same idea, and have since obviously moved into tracking and traceability. So, which being in FMCG, so your chips, chocolate and Coke, it's quite low margin compared to your high value perishables, where the value of the loss is so huge.
Oh wow! And it's so binary as well, isn't it? You're like, I've got a tanker of milk, or I've got a tanker of problems.
Surprise!
Yeah. and that's so interesting, that because you hear about these company hackathons, and sometimes some people listening might have taken part, and I guess mileage varies with a lot of that stuff, as to whether you come out with something that you then change your life to do, or whether it was just a really cool way of thinking differently for a weekend. But yeah, that to have that result and then to get into an accelerator is such a cool result.
Yeah, it was awesome. But at the same time, Air New Zealand was such a great place to work, and I still miss them dearly. Being a sole founder, it's quite lonely. And I worked with some amazing people. So, but at the same time, I have this opportunity to work really hard. And as Simon was saying before, the rewards are there, and every morning you just wake up and you're like, go.
Yeah. Well, tell me what the situation's like at the moment. So, you've got all of these kind of trucking and transport businesses that are moving perishable, recently milked, or recently harvested goods. And what do they have, temperature needs and timing needs?
Yeah, so exactly. So one of the big things for me is the summertime. So summer fruit comes from Central Otago. So the cherries are trucked for 48 hours from Cromwell up to Auckland. So they're transported all through the South Island, then they sit on the ferry, and then they're in the North Island, and then they sit on the tarmac, and then they are flown off to Shanghai or Guangzhou or wherever in Asia. So those cherries need to stay between 0 and 4 degrees at 95% humidity. Otherwise, those growers could sustain huge amounts of losses. And particularly with cherries, as it's such a short season, that you want to get that fruit up there in the best quality conditions it can be. So it is just that visibility in the supply chain. So you're connecting the growers, the distributors that are getting those goods up there, and then also the final customers that are seeing those goods arrive.
Because we as the end customer, we don't really see the waste or even hear about it, do we? But we might suddenly find that cherries are a bit cheaper in the supermarket. And is that because a massive load was decided that it's not going to make it overseas and hits the local market? Or what kind of stuff's happening in the background that we as customers aren't seeing in terms of that food waste?
Well, particularly in Australia where the temperatures are so high. So, recently there was a truckload of meat that was going from Brisbane up to Cairns. And there's 2 different fuel tanks. There's one for the truck and one for the back. And often, someone could just forget to fill up the back. So in that example, you had a whole town that didn't have their supply of meat, as well as all of that food waste. So I think, the transporters are working really hard to get us amazing, fresh product on our shelves. But it's just that connectivity in the background that everyone's logistically trying to do. And particularly for smaller growers or producers, they are at the mercy of a fragmented cool chain. They don't have the scale to be able to contract the likes of Toll or Linfox or anything to have that end-to-end solution.
Right. So the small people, especially around the edges and using multiple suppliers, and then there's a little bit of a I don't know. How do you solve that? How do you give them the now you know?
So I think particularly with consumer goods, we're so used to being able to track our Uber, track our pizza, and you've got these huge $1 million loads that are travelling through and just no one knows where they are. So what we do is we attach a GPS tracker, which gives live data and on temperature, location and shock. So particularly with things like cherries, if they get dropped at one point, the bruising doesn't show up until much later on, so you can isolate that event. But more importantly, when temperatures are getting high, is being able to act and react. So we send those alerts so that people can actually jump in. Nobody starts their day thinking, I'm going to ruin all of these goods. So it's actually giving them the information and insights to start to manage their supply chain.
Yeah, how have the truckies and the transporters in the middle reacted to this? Because I imagine on one end it's great, I'm never going to spoil a load and be in trouble and no one's going to yell at me. But on the other end, they're going to know if you took an extra half-hour stop somewhere.
Yeah, I also think that they no longer have as many phone calls. That fundamentally that's what I save people is time on the phone. And I'm helping them run their business. So, yes, a lot of people have said that you're opening up a can of worms, but like I said, people just want to be helped, particularly those growers. They work so hard to get their goods ready at the pack house, packed up and ready to go, and then for it to break in the cool chain, it's just such a waste.
Cool, and we'll be back in a minute to hear more about that soon. If you love the Spin-Off, the best way to show it is to become part of the Spin-Off members. This is the fun that helps us keep free and accessible to all without a paywall, and also fund some of our most important and acclaimed journalism. Check it out through the Spin-Off.
Hi, I'm Russell Brown, and I'll make a podcast for the Spin-Off called Actually Interesting. Those are also the initials of its topic, artificial intelligence, which is very interesting. You can find us on your favourite podcast providers or on thespinoff.co.nz.
It sounds like you've really got to know your customer there. How did you go about kind of getting the idea out there and learning about those customer pain points and then solving them for them and getting the business off the ground?
I love my customers. I have these lovely, not to disrespect anyone, older gentlemen that have helped me build my product. So I have been in their faces. They have been giving me feedback. I think the worst kind of feedback is when you get that disappointed dad, when they look at you oh, it was so much better last time. That's the worst, because you're oh. But using that and learning from that and being better every time just makes for a better solution that they love to use.
And what stage is the company at now?
So I have been very lucky. I've had 2 busy summers. So obviously with agritech, you've got this huge seasonality element that the others don't. So for us, it's really important to build out into the Northern Hemisphere. So I was lucky enough to go on an immersion program, which was going through Netherlands, Belgium and Germany. So meeting customers there and starting to see how the Northern Hemisphere works. And then also I was in the US in September trying to figure out how those transport networks work as well. So that's what I'm trying to build, is that customer base in both hemispheres, because the most reliable revenue is customer revenue. But the reality is that I will need to raise soon. But as soon as you start doing that, it takes you out of your business. So that's the dichotomy that I'm dealing with.
And how important are things like this thing where you, but bringing you in as well, Simon, here, like where you're able to go onto these missions with, because there was a whole kind of bunch of funders right through to customers, through to other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges or who've been, through the stages before. How important is it to get into a network of kind of 65 people going places?
I'm very lucky. Like I have Justin. So Justin works with Simon, and Justin is constantly messaging me about things that are happening and being applied for and grants and applications. So it is incredible. And I think also being in agritech, you are on your own in these rural areas, in pack houses, in DCs, in warehouses with your customers. It's these amazing events that bring you all together. Unlike these fintechs that are all in these shiny CBD shared workspaces where they can bounce ideas off each other. This is just amazing to be together and be, again, speaking to people that know about GPS and trackers and backends, and I'm like, wow.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the networking value of these events is probably the number one thing. It's funny too, because it's also not just the other delegates or the international folks, although that's massive. It's actually the Kiwis on the bus.
Yes.
There's nothing like, having 30, 40, 50 Kiwis on a bus, and all this interaction happens and learnings, stuff that would never happen back home in Z. But, Evoke Ag is really building that network. I mean, we had a delegation of UK companies who came and interacted with us on our New Zealand stand, and it's just incredible, right? You've got 30, 40 Kiwis, 15, 20 UK folks, all sharing ideas and building business in Australia, which is cool.
Yeah, so how did it actually go down? Like, what happened and what were the outcomes from it?
Yeah, so the key with this kind of event is it's not a trade event. Like, there were a couple of companies there, like Newpoint, like Andrea and another company called Masterplex, who actually had stands there and would be selling product or at least leading to selling product. But most of it's around that stage before. So finding investment, working on product development projects, understanding the market better. So the actual revenue generation is likely to happen, from sort of 6 months onwards. And that's the key reason Callaghan is driving this, together with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, because NZT is more at that trade end of town, right, where you actually go to a conference or an event and you're literally selling your stuff, right? So we sort of, like I said, building that pipeline.
And I imagine it's very similar to the field days strategy here, where if there's one sector that's actually very hard to physically serve, it's the agricultural sector, in that there's a lot of driving, there's a lot of getting into the gumboots. You can only visit 1 or 2 people in a day. You've got to stop for a cup of tea. There's only certain times in the day that you're going to be welcome. And so those events where everyone kind of comes together and is there to kind of meet and network must be absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head, Simon. I mean, channels are really challenging within the agritech. No disrespect to someone doing FMCG, but there's pretty much 2 supermarkets here, a few other channels that you can try. But just working out your pathway to market's really important. And, Andrea's talked about that and some of the customers and people she's trying to work with. So, yeah.
How does the New Zealand name work out there? Because we're obviously known as a as a country of great kind of farming innovation.
Yep.
But like, you know, it's never easy doing business into Australia, is it? Like, we spoke to Dion Nash, and he said his strategy with Triumph and Disaster was to go to the States first, because if you're a Kiwi that goes to Australia with a product that's done well in LA, they're like, oh, great, you're interesting. But if you're a Kiwi over there, they're like, oh, God, not another Kiwi.
Yeah, it's a really interesting relationship. People describe it as sort of like big brother, little brother, and that's really apt. But this is one of the few areas actually where New Zealand's a leader, and that was really well recognised at the conference. Even the Aussie guys, perhaps sort of chewing on their tongue a bit, would openly say, hey, you guys are leading in this area in terms of investment in companies and stuff. So, yeah, we definitely, I hate that phrase, but punch above our weight. And there's a lot of respect there from the Australians. But, you're right. There's nothing like having done your product elsewhere to really get interest, right?
And how, Andrea, do you go about getting involved in programs like this and getting in touch with people who can help an idea, access the grants and access the networks that help it grow?
Is really keeping close to people like Justin that I was talking about, Simon, and the NZTE. So the more that they know about your business, the more that they can help. So again, like physically going to see them.
Yeah, and how do you kick that off? Do you just kind of Google them up and go in for an appointment, or how did you get involved?
So I actually applied through the Callaghan Getting Started grant, and then you get referred through the networks, and then these guys are in the agritech space. So Justin's actually based in Christchurch, so it was just by chance that I went down there and actually saw him and Sam had actually started up his own business before that. So again, you're working with people that have started a business before, because on the outside it looks very fun and glamorous and shiny. Inside there is a lot of pain.
Yeah, you're thinking about your gumboots in the back of the car and the late nights. And in terms of like, it is quite remarkable, isn't it? Like, I quite often talk to people who are like, oh, I didn't think it would apply to me to just get in touch with these people. And then I did. And there was a person whose job it was just to help introduce me to people and see if they could help me get funding and get in front of customers. You're like, well, that's pretty handy.
But not exactly that. So I think as soon as I finished with Justin that day, he then referred me on to 3 or 4 other startups, because again, we're all dispersed. And so we've had phone calls and video calls, but I haven't since then met them. But one of the guys referred me an intern, and somebody else was like, you need to apply for this grant. So there is this, once you're in that little agtech network, there is like little channels that go on there.
And having come from corporate finance, like working, in New Zealand's a very cool company and is run really well and has an extraordinary reputation because it is so high performing, to pop out of that and into being a non-technical founder, how have you managed to kind of push along and learn the things that you didn't have to in the kind of making all of the tech and the business grow?
There is so much on the internet that you can teach yourself now. Like, people say that, but until you've actually got a problem to solve, or it's going to cost you contract fees of $300-400 and you can work out how to fix it yourself, then you really learn how to teach yourself. But obviously, because I went through that accelerator program, it gave me that landing pad basically. So, obviously, unfortunately, some of the cohort have dropped off, but even still, the ones that are remaining, we still chat every month and we still keep each other honest, and we all see each other goals of what we're going to do and achieve. But you don't know what the answer is every day, and it's just do something and then figure it out.
Yeah. And what advice do you have to people who might be sitting on might have uncovered, turned over a rock and found some kind of remarkable fact, like all of the waste that was existing inside the food industry and the latent unproductivity of only using your trucks a third of the time, to go from having that cool insight and actually turning it into a product with data trackers and trucks all around the place, and people people benefiting from your product?
It blows my mind because even thinking about it like a year ago, I was literally changing batteries for 3 or 4 hours a day. I had all of these trackers and I was like, oh. But it's just going through it, like every day you're going to learn more and just keep trying and there's no better feedback than customer feedback. So if you can find someone that's going to pay for your product, yes, there's lots of freemium, yes, there's lots of free pilots, but everyone's going to try something for free. But until they actually put money where their mouth is, they don't necessarily see value. So obviously they'll pay for their pilot, but if you can then start getting that reoccurring revenue happening, then you know that you're really onto something. And again, I think as being agtech, we have that revenue for 5 to 6 months, and then it drops off until next season. So it's basically then again working those hemispheres.
And
or figuring out a business model that can nail the full 12 months, which would be awesome.
And Simon, what advice would you have for companies who are starting to get a bit of traction and are interested in taking it to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is you've got to be passionate about what you want to do, and Andrea really conveys that really well. You've got to really believe in what you're doing, because I think it is a harder road to hoe than doing a corporate job, as much value as that can bring as well. I think the key, I believe, going forward is that networking collaboration piece. That sort of DIY culture that maybe is a little bit inherent in New Zealand, it just doesn't work anymore. The pace of change, the new technologies, the new market, that are evolving sort of on a weekly basis. You've got to be part of the network, I believe, to be successful. And I mean, we are a relatively friendly bunch here at Callaghan. So we're here to help, and if companies want to grow and they want to globalise, then we're really keen to work with them.
Yeah, and we always ask people on the show, which is something we love, like, what does success look like? What does success look like for you, Simon?
Yeah. So we've developed what we call a playing to win strategy. And the key with that is to really focus on what we're about and what we're going to do as well as what we're not going to do. So that's come down to the fact that, as I mentioned before, New Zealand is a $1.5 billion export industry, and we want to turn that into a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so that that's a very lofty goal, and we're not the ones who are going to do it. Companies like Andrea and Sparrows are the ones who are actually going to achieve that, but we're here to help and support those companies. And so everything we do should be, wrapped around that goal.
That's so cool. And a lot of those companies that are, for profit and doing good things, they are doing things like working to limit the amount of nitrogen being used and to make more efficient, like to lower emissions and to do all kinds of things that have lots of other benefits as well as the financial, hey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what's so cool about being in this space, because, just about every company we work for is helping womankind, in terms of less food waste, more healthy food, just being more efficient, less environmentally damaging. And then that's being driven by the consumer too, which is really cool. So we get in behind that as government, obviously.
That's so cool. And how about you, Andrea? What will success be for you with Sparrows?
I think, but as an industry, I would love to see more people in agriculture. I think, Simon's talking about these lofty goals that we've got, but it's going to be bringing people in. In agriculture, we have robots and we have drones, and we need really smart scientists to be working on those varieties. So how do we get those amazing people working in our orchards as well? They're such beautiful places to be, because we can't achieve that level of success unless we've got that brain power behind us. And as I say, I love my customers, and I would love more people working with those customers.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. That's Simon Yarrow, who leads Callaghan Innovation's agritech team, and Andrea Watson, founder and CEO at Sparrows. Thank you for sharing your stories today.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much to Tina Tiller for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound, and brought to you by The Spin-Off and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.